the little knock on my front door should never have happened. It was a few minutes after midnight, the kind of hour when even the wind seems afraid to make a sound. I almost ignored it until I heard it again, 3 tiny taps that carried more fear than force. When I opened the door, a little girl from the house next door stood barefoot on my porch, clutching a faded stuffed rabbit. Her cheeks were wet with tears, and before I could ask if she was lost, she looked into my eyes and whispered something that would change every broken piece of my life forever. She said she needed a dad before Friday. Before we begin, if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, and second chances, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories to life. For several seconds, I couldn't move. Her words echoed inside my head while the cold night air rushed past us. I recognized her immediately. Her name was Maisie. She was 7 years old, lived next door with her mother, and was the kind of child who waved at everyone even if they didn't wave back. I had seen her riding her little blue bicycle, drawing chalk flowers on the sidewalk, and carrying grocery bags that looked too heavy for someone her size. We had exchanged smiles before, but we had never truly spoken. I knelt beside her and asked what she meant. Instead of answering, she held out a crumpled envelope with shaking hands. It had no stamp, no address, only one word written across the front in neat handwriting. Guardian. I invited her inside, wrapped a blanket around her tiny shoulders, and made a cup of warm cocoa she barely touched. Her eyes kept drifting toward the front window as though someone terrible might appear at any second. Finally, she whispered that her mommy had been taken to the hospital that evening after collapsing at work. Before the ambulance left, her mother had hugged her tightly and told her to remember the envelope hidden under the flower pot beside the porch. If anything happened, she was supposed to bring it to the man next door. I was the man next door. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. It began with an apology. The woman next door, Nora, wrote that she knew this request would sound impossible. She explained that she had been battling a serious heart condition for years but had hidden it from almost everyone, especially her daughter. The surgery scheduled for Friday carried dangerous risks. She had no close family left alive. Maisie's father had disappeared before she was born, leaving behind nothing except unanswered questions. Then came the sentence that stole the air from my lungs. If I don't survive Friday, I'm asking the only man I've ever trusted from a distance to become my daughter's father. I stared at the page, convinced I had misunderstood. The letter continued. She wrote that she had watched me for nearly 4 years. She saw me shovel snow from elderly neighbors' driveways without asking for anything in return. She watched me rescue a frightened dog after a storm. She noticed how I still placed fresh flowers every month on my late wife's grave before quietly returning home. She admitted she had wanted to introduce herself many times but never found the courage because grief had built walls around both of us. I couldn't breathe. Because she was right. 5 years earlier, I had buried my wife and our unborn daughter after a drunk driver destroyed everything I had dreamed of. Since then, I existed more than I lived. My days were predictable. Work. Home. Silence. Repeat. I had convinced myself that loving anyone again would only invite more pain. Yet now a frightened little girl sat on my couch looking at me with desperate hope. She wasn't asking for money. She wasn't asking for toys. She was asking for a father. The next morning arrived with a bright sunrise that felt strangely out of place. Hospitals should not receive beautiful mornings. Maisie insisted on visiting her mother before school. When we reached the hospital, Nora looked far weaker than I had ever imagined. Tubes surrounded her bed, but her face softened the moment she saw her daughter smiling. Then she looked at me. Neither of us knew what to say. Her eyes filled with tears before any words came. She apologized for placing such an enormous burden on someone she barely knew. I surprised myself by taking her hand. I admitted that I didn't know how to be anyone's father. She smiled weakly. She said neither did she when Maisie was born. For the next several days, my carefully protected life disappeared. Every morning I made breakfast for Maisie before school. Every afternoon we visited Nora together. Every evening I helped with homework, listened to stories about imaginary dragons, and learned that children ask impossible questions at the most unexpected moments. One afternoon she asked if heaven had playgrounds. Another day she wondered whether broken hearts healed like broken bones. I never had perfect answers. But somehow, she never seemed disappointed. Friday arrived too quickly. The surgery lasted nearly 8 hours. Every minute felt endless. Maisie fell asleep with her head resting against my arm in the waiting room while I silently begged a God I hadn't spoken to in years. Then the surgeon finally appeared. His expression said everything before his mouth opened. There had been complications. Nora had survived. But only barely. Recovery would be long, uncertain, and filled with difficult months ahead. Relief crashed over us like a wave. Maisie cried harder than I had ever seen anyone cry. She hugged me so tightly that I realized something terrifying. I didn't want to let go. Life slowly found a rhythm after that. Nora returned home months later. Physical therapy exhausted her. Medical bills overwhelmed her. Still, every evening we ate dinner together. Neighbors started assuming we were already a family. We laughed it off. At least at first. Then something unexpected happened. The empty chair at my dining table no longer felt haunted. The house echoed with laughter instead of silence. Christmas lights returned to my porch after years of darkness. My late wife's photographs remained where they belonged, but they no longer represented the end of my story. Instead, they reminded me that love had once existed. Which meant it could exist again. Just when life finally seemed peaceful, everything collapsed. One afternoon a luxury SUV stopped outside the house. A sharply dressed man stepped out carrying expensive luggage. He introduced himself as Victor. He claimed to be Maisie's biological father. He said he had recently discovered Nora's illness and wanted custody of his daughter. The neighborhood buzzed with rumors before sunset. Some believed he genuinely regretted abandoning them. Others believed he only wanted control. Maisie refused to speak to him. She hid behind me whenever he approached. Victor insisted children deserved their biological parents. His lawyers agreed. Suddenly every happy moment we'd built together stood on fragile ground. Court hearings began. Social workers interviewed everyone. Teachers, neighbors, doctors, friends. They all described the same thing. Maisie had become happier. Healthier. Safer. But biology still carried weight. The judge delayed the decision. Weeks stretched into months. The stress nearly destroyed Nora's recovery. Then the biggest twist arrived from the least expected place. Victor requested a private meeting with me. I assumed another argument awaited. Instead, he handed me an old photograph. It showed a much younger Nora smiling beside him. On the back she'd written one sentence. "If you ever become the man I know you can be, come find us." Victor stared at the picture for a long time before speaking. He admitted he had been terrified of responsibility when Nora became pregnant. He had chosen money over family. Career over love. Freedom over fatherhood. Everything he built afterward became meaningless. He married. Divorced. Lost contact with everyone who mattered. Only after receiving news about Nora's surgery did he realize what he had thrown away. He looked at me with exhausted eyes. Then he asked the question I never expected. "Did Maisie call me Dad?" I nodded. He closed his eyes. Tears rolled silently down his face. He whispered that she had never called him anything. The courtroom grew silent during the final hearing. Everyone expected another legal battle. Instead, Victor stood before the judge and withdrew his custody request. He admitted that fatherhood was earned through presence, sacrifice, patience, and unconditional love, not biology alone. He asked only for the opportunity to slowly rebuild trust as a visitor if Maisie ever wished. The judge accepted. Nora cried. I cried. Even Victor cried. Outside the courthouse, Maisie walked slowly toward him. For a terrifying moment, nobody knew what would happen. Then she hugged him. Not because he deserved immediate forgiveness, but because children sometimes carry more grace than adults ever learn. She told him she already had a dad. But maybe one day she could have a friend too. No one spoke. No one needed to. A year later, on one bright Saturday afternoon beneath golden autumn trees, I stood beside Nora in a small community garden surrounded by neighbors who had unknowingly watched our story unfold from beginning to end. She smiled the same shy smile I had seen across fences for years. Only now there were no walls between us. When she asked whether I still remembered the letter, I admitted I carried it in my wallet every single day. Then I took out another envelope. Inside rested adoption papers. Along with a ring. Before I could finish asking, Maisie threw herself between us, laughing that she'd been waiting forever. Nora said yes before I finished the sentence. Months later, the judge finalized the adoption. When the clerk asked Maisie whether she agreed, she smiled so brightly that the entire room seemed warmer. She looked directly at me. She didn't whisper this time. She proudly called me Dad. The word healed wounds I had believed would stay open forever. I realized then that families are not always born. Sometimes they are quietly built through ordinary acts of kindness that become extraordinary over time. Sometimes destiny doesn't arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it knocks gently after midnight holding a worn-out stuffed rabbit. Speech balloon special request: before the story ends, tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in this situation? If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe for more meaningful and inspiring stories. Your support encourages us to keep creating stories that touch hearts around the world. The greatest miracles rarely look like miracles when they first arrive. They often appear disguised as impossible responsibilities, heartbreaking choices, or frightened children searching for hope. Love is not measured by blood alone but by every promise we keep, every sacrifice we make, every hand we refuse to let go of, and every second chance we choose to give. Sometimes the family you've been praying for isn't the one you lost, it's the one quietly waiting behind the next unexpected knock on your door.